Hello everybody, welcome to a new episode of Disabled Lawyer and Plus. My name is Joanna Owen. I am the chair of the Association of Disabled Lawyers. Today I am delighted to say we have Joanna Owen taking part. Joanna enjoying access social care as legal manager recently, where she is working with a team of lawyers and caseworkers. Joanna supports and supervises the caseworkers, trains new staff, and works with the legal team to develop itself. Joanna is an experienced lawyer and worked for a long time for the Equality and Human Rights Commission, where she led their work on health and social care. Joanna is extremely passionate about disability rights and the movement around it. Joanna has maintained a connection with that movement where her interest in law originated. Thank you for taking part, Joanna. It's fantastic to have you.
You're welcome. I'm excited to be part of this.
We really are delighted to have you. The first question is a wide-ranging question, and people often answer it in different ways. But what does being disabled mean to you?
What does being disabled mean to me? It means, oh gosh, a lot of things. Well, it's sort of part of my identity now, so it's quite hard to sort of unpick what it means. But it means, you know, I sort of see the world through a lens of the social model of disability, where people who have different impairments are disabled by the social constructs and physical environment more than by our physical or mental impairments. And I've been a disabled person since I was 18, and I'm now quite a lot older than that. And so, I think that my journey was, I became disabled because of a car accident. So as an 18-year-old, it was quite difficult to adjust to. And I think I sort of first started feeling all right about my new identity and being a wheelchair user and being paralyzed about 3 years after I had the accident, when I went to study in California at Berkeley University, where the whole sort of disability rights movement had started about 10 years before that. And I made friends with a lot of disabled people out there and became sort of more liberated and passionate about disability rights. So that's been my journey as a disabled person.
I'm glad you mentioned the social model of disability. The association is dedicated to the social model, and we have it in our articles of association that we will abide by the social model, because we fundamentally believe in removing the barriers in society rather than portraying disabled people's impairments as a problem. It's a very interesting model, and I think it goes a long way to removing the stigma and the barriers in society that prevent us from having an equal opportunity to independent living, education, and employment.
Agree.
including the legal careers.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's empowering for disabled people when they first, well, certainly was for me, and I know other people have had the same experience. When you first find out about it and it clicks and you see the world completely differently, you stop thinking it's all your responsibility and all to do with you, that everything's so difficult.
I think that's extremely empowering. We are in July, and July is Disability Pride Month, which is about empowering disabled people. What does disability pride mean to you?
I think it means the community of disabled people feeling, and individual disabled people feeling good about themselves and the world, and proud of who they are, and proud of their achievements. We've got lots to be proud of, because often we have to fight battles that other people don't have to fight, to do the simplest of things, even get up in the morning, let alone get jobs and go to work and get educations and have fun and go on holidays. So I think we have a lot to be proud of. And so it's good to have a time in the year to mark that.
It really is. As you say, we have a lot of battles to fight, and being proud to be a disabled person is about recognizing that and recognizing the people that we share a community with. And the way that everybody in our community is different in so many ways, but we all have a common understanding of the barriers in society.
Yeah.
All the difficulties we have to overcome.
Agree.
You've had a fantastic career in law. You spent a long time at the Equality and Human Rights Commission, a career which I find personally inspiring because of the amount of influence you have had and the recommendations around social care. And now you're doing similar work with access social care. Please, could you tell us a little bit more about what your job involves?
My current job?
Both or either?
Okay, well, I'll tell you, I think it might be helpful and hopefully interesting to explain the sort of path of my legal career. I qualified when I was about 35. So my first degree was in history, and I did a few other things. I worked in, I did a bit of research after university, then I worked in disability organisations and for a council in a disability policy unit. And then all my life really, and increasingly as I got through my 20s, I was interested in being a lawyer, but I thought I wasn't clever enough to be a lawyer, because I thought you had to be really, really clever, and I wasn't clever enough. And then I met somebody who had done the CPE, as it was called then, the conversion course, which is now called something else, graduate, something other grad. I can't remember what it's called, but anyway, the conversion course. Can you remember its name?
Yeah, I think it's called the graduate diploma in law.
That's the one.
If you ever see it again.
Yeah. Yeah, so I applied to do that in my early 30s and then worked part-time and studied part-time. And I qualified in when I was 36. And the first job I had where I did my training contract was in private practice with Levine's solicitors, which at that time, I'm not sure whether they still do, but at that time they had a disability and education department. And I worked there because I knew I applied to do my training contract there. I knew it was going to be difficult to get training contracts. And part of me didn't want to go, part of me thought, well, I should bloody well be able to apply anywhere. But the pragmatic part of me realized that actually that wasn't going to be possible for a number of reasons, including physical access to offices, but also, you know, at that time there were less. It was before the Disability Discrimination Act was in force, so there weren't such strong employment rights for disabled people, anti-discrimination legislation, and so I applied for a training contract at Levine's because I knew the person that headed up that disability and education department, who was also a disabled person, and he said he thought that he encouraged me to apply, even though I wasn't going to be working in his department initially. So I worked there for 3 or 4 years, did my training contract, qualified there, and then I left there when the Disability Rights Commission was set up. And I worked for the DRC for a few years because it felt like the right place to go. I was just starting to do some discrimination cases at Levine's, having done a lot of personal injury cases because that's what they specialised in those days. I think they're mostly employment now. And yeah, so the DRC was set up in 2000, around about the time, the year 2000. And then that became the EHRC in 2007. So that it felt like the right thing to do because I'd always been involved in the disability movement and was part of the crew of people in the 80s who changed ourselves to buses and things like that to campaign for accessible transport. Obviously, I had to start behaving myself a bit more when I became a lawyer and not put myself in situations where I was likely to get arrested. So the progression to work in the commissions where the work is all about upholding rights was the natural thing for me to do. So yeah, at the Equality and Human Rights Commission, I was a senior lawyer there. I did a variety of things using all the commission's different legal powers. I conducted litigation. I led the evidence elements of some major inquiries, including the investigation into the Metropolitan Police. We looked at race, sex and sexual orientation discrimination in the way that the Met Police handle their complaints. And quite a lot of equality and human rights policy work too, working on bills that are going through Parliament to ensure that the equality and human rights protections were properly embedded as much as we could. And now I became more and more interested in, and the Commission became more and more interested, partly because I was pushing it, in human rights and community care and social care. And so the last sort of 6 or 7 years, that was my focus at the EHRC. I led that work, and I was attracted a year or so ago to work with Access Social Care, which is this very exciting new charity, which has been in existence for 2 years and has grown enormously since it started and continues to grow and fills a gap by providing legal advice for disabled people and families on rights to social care. Because of the recent-ish legal aid cuts, there are hardly any community care lawyers anymore, or very few, and any those that are around the most sort of profitable work. So therefore the work that mostly gets done is court of protection work. So non-court of protection social care legal cases are not well served at all, and access social care is filling a gap with a sort of charitable free service where private practice is not able to provide those that offer anymore. So that's what I do. That's what I've done. Rather a long answer to your short question.
It's a very interesting answer because you demonstrate your journey from how you started and where you are now, and I think that will be extremely useful to anyone who's at the beginning of a career trying to figure out what legal profession might work best for them and their interests. Social care is something that's close to me because I employ PAs to collect payments, and obviously you will know it's not an easy thing to manage. Not only do you become an employer, and you may not have any understanding of employment law, and also you're engaged with the Care Act and social services and care plans. It's a complicated web that disabled people have to navigate just to be able to live independent lives. So I think the work you did with the Equality and Human Rights Commission and now access social care is so important to providing that legal support to people in social care who don't have any other choice but to be involved in a very complicated system.
Yeah, I mean, I think my personal experience of being a social care user and an employer of PAs with direct payments it gives me a particular insight, and I think any other lawyers who go into that area of law, and I would really encourage lots of people to do that because we need lots more. Anyone who brings their personal experience through to their professional work is adding incredible value to the service that they provide the clients, because you've got that understanding, you know what it feels like the other side of the fence when you're constantly being faced with really difficult assessments and reviews, and let alone the whole job of being an employer and having PAs living in your house and all that side of things. So yeah, for sure that piqued my interest in that area of law.
You've done fantastic things in your career, but what have been the best experiences of your career?
Probably the most exciting experience I had was when I was working at the EHRC. No, it was at the DRC, actually. It was the Disability Rights Commission. I had been the lead lawyer in an inquiry we'd done into health inequalities experienced by people with learning disabilities and people with mental health problems in primary care services. And there was a big conference that the report was, it was a 1.5-year inquiry, masses of evidence, really good report and recommendations, and that was sort of widely well received. And there was a conference that happened in Acapulco in Mexico, and I got an email one morning saying, and the subject line was "La La La Bamba, do you want to go?" And so it was, I had a work trip to Acapulco for a week, where I gave presentations on, it was a big international conference on learning disability, and I gave presentations on our inquiry. So that was probably the most exciting thing that I've ever done in my career, or maybe the most exotic. I think the best feelings that I've had in my career, the best bits are when I've had good wins, or a really good outcome in a case. And I can't think of any off the top of my head, but that is a really, really good feeling. And sometimes it's even, actually I do remember one, an early one at the EHRC. Sometimes it's not, you can get an amazing outcome after just one really, really carefully crafted letter to an organization. It doesn't necessarily follow that you have to take cases all the way to the Supreme Court to get an amazing outcome. Obviously that does happen sometimes and takes years, but there was we had a complaint to the EHRC from a sports charity, a sports organization that represented people with learning disabilities. It was about 4 years before the London 2012 Paralympics and Olympics. And at that point, people with learning disabilities were banned from taking part in Paralympics. I don't know if you know about this history, but it was because during the Barcelona Paralympics, for some reason, some Spanish journalists thought it would be a good wheeze to pretend they were learning disabled, and they formed a basketball team and took part in the Paralympics. And then they, after that had happened, they sort of exposed it and exposed their ruse, and it had the effect that it had was that all people with learning disabilities were banned from the Paralympics for a while.
I mean, so, that sounds awful.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't, I mean, I can't really believe I'm saying it, but that is actually what happened. And so we wondered what to do. And I wrote, I took the case on, talked to some of the organizations involved, found out more about the background. And I wrote a really carefully crafted letter to LOCOG, which was the London Organising Committee, and the International Paralympics Committee. And I felt like I must have been slightly pushing on an open door, or maybe I'm being too humble there. But anyway, the letter had the desired effect, and they overturned their position, which was really good.
It seems, a carefully working letter can have such an impact, and in most legal careers, learning advocacy plays an important role. In the job, and in that example, is a good one for showing the impact that written advocacy can have, and what written advocacy can't be underestimated when providing advice and making change. And it is a good example of showing impact, like here in New York, the Equality and Human Rights Commission around, because it was a capable position, and now all disabled people can take part in the Paralympics as a result.
Yeah, it was good. It was particularly good for the EHRC too, because it was early on in the life of the EHRC, and I think some of the government departments and some businesses were, worrying that we were going to be bothering everybody with legal cases and dragging everybody to court straight away. And so we were able to use it as an example of what you and I know, and other lawyers know, which is that sometimes a really careful letter can get what you're after, and but the big wide world doesn't necessarily know that. So we were able to use it as an example of, look, this isn't going to hurt anybody. This is all that it takes. Sometimes we're not going to cost you loads of money and barristers' fees and solicitors' fees.
You've had some big wins in your career, including the one you just explained. Well, increase of people have good and negative experiences. What have been the worst experiences of your career?
I think the first worst one, which obviously sticks in my mind, was when I was doing my training contract. I was sent out to do various applications and sit behind counsel in quite a few county court cases around London. And there was one that I was doing one day in Edmonton County Court. It was a family family case. It was an application to do with a family case, and there was some documents that had to be, some original documents that had to take in the file and had to be given to the judge, so that they could be served that day on one of the parents. And obviously in those days, we're talking a long time ago, over 30 years ago, everything was paper copy, and so the original was a paper copy, and it was in one of those envelope folders. That was the file. I took the whole file along, and I got out of my van. It was a really, really windy day and raining, and I was coming down with the folder, envelope folder file on my lap, and I had my hand on it so it wouldn't, the top flap wouldn't blow up, and something distracted me, and I moved my hand, and the whole file literally got lifted off my lap by this gust of wind in the rain, and I just watched it go off down the road, papers falling out. It was awful. I mean, we managed to retrieve the document that I needed, but not all the documents. And it was an early lesson for me to always make sure the folders, those sorts of files, had elastic bands around them.
I'm a wheelchair user myself, and my hands are particularly great, so I can imagine how you felt when you saw your papers flying away with I got experience not record papers, but papers I wanted to keep, and you can just watch them fly away. It gets them. I feel your heartbreak.
It was awful, and I had to go in, and the district judge wasn't very, or whoever it wasn't very. I can't remember if it was a district judge, but they weren't very sympathetic, because the document was wet and a bit dirty, and I'd lost some of the other documents, which were confidential information. I was never able to retrieve all of them, so I then had to go back to the office and explain what had happened, which was also very embarrassing. And so that's probably the worst thing that's ever happened.
It must be so stressful giving all those factors. But thankfully now, given the pandemic and lockdowns and whatever, many papers are now online, and that makes it so much easier, not only for disabled practitioners, but all practitioners. So hopefully people will never have to experience watching confidential papers fly away.
Yeah, I agree. It's all much better, and better for the environment. We don't use so much paper anymore.
Absolutely. What would you like people to take away from your career, Jenny?
I think people should not try and hide who they are, and hide their play down their personal experience of being a disabled person, because whatever legal career you go into as a disabled person, or any person actually, that your own life experience is usually going to be really, really relevant and really important to your work. And we talked earlier about being employers of our PAs for our assistants at home for our care needs, and there's not many people who are aged mid-20s or 30s, I think, when I started doing that, who could say that they've got experience of being an employer and doing all of that, and negotiating sometimes difficult conversations with PAs and performance issues and that sort of thing. So I think I think there's a tendency, and certainly I had it. I don't anymore, but I did have it initially, to sort of play down all that side of my life when I was training, and when I first started being a lawyer. But the more I did it, the more I realized actually it's all really relevant. I remember doing the legal practice course, and we had to do something called interview skills. And I don't know if you had it in part of your bar training too, but we were filmed doing interviewing somebody, a client, a pretend client, and it just came as second nature to me, because I'd done so many interviews for PAs, and I knew how to make people feel comfortable to start, and knew how to, what sort of chit chat at the beginning, and knew how to launch into questions. And I remember my sort of fellow students were really struggling with it, and I always scored really well in those sorts of sessions. So yeah, I think that would be the first thing. The second thing is so the first thing is, don't underplay your personal experience, because it's going to help you and it will be relevant. The second thing is that there are barriers that you're going to face. For people with mobility impairments, there's still a lot of buildings we struggle to get into and around. doors that we struggle to open, and also the financial side of things. You know, the training, the legal training is very expensive, but I would really encourage people who have got a real itch to become a lawyer and are disabled people to go for it, because, you know, it's definitely the best thing I did in doing that training. And I've had such interesting jobs. It hasn't always been plain sailing. Obviously, nothing is when in work, but I think people just go for it. Know that there's going to be some barriers in the way. Use your skills as someone who negotiates the world, having to deal with barriers anyway, to deal with the barriers that you're going to face in your career.
You mentioned about playing down your the fact that you employ PAs in your early career, and that really resonates with me, because I did the same. I didn't want to talk about my families. I didn't want to mention the fact that I need PAs from all. But in more recent years, I've become more open about it, because it provides me with experience that I can use in my legal career and in life in general. So you mentioned negotiating difficult conversations, and that is exactly what we do on quite a regular basis. And we do it knowing it's quite a power imbalance, because we need our PAs, and that can give them a sense of self-importance, and that can make the whole negotiation even more difficult. The fact that we are able to have those conversations and manage a career as well, and manage a whole team of people just to be able to get out of bed in the morning, it really provides you with an additional skill set you probably wouldn't have. And in our case, it provided me with an understanding of employment law that I wouldn't have otherwise encountered. And now I'm using employment law on a day-to-day basis. And I hope I'll be able to use that in my practice.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can use it in that way. And I like when you mention obstacles, because obviously, in many ways, it comes part of the package of being a disabled person, because that is what makes us disabled. And disabled people at this moment in time are facing many obstacles. What do you think the most pertinent issues are right now for disabled people in general?
The most burning issues.
Yeah.
I think the general lack of resources in, you know, public services, whether it's for benefits or for the support that we need to be able to live our lives. The massive shrinking of budgets that particularly local authorities, but also CCGs have had to encounter is having a big impact on us. I think people with mental health problems in particular have really, really tricky barriers to compete with, because of people's there's still a huge lack of awareness about mental health. Yeah, I think it's ironic that a lot of the laws, a lot of the legislation is really good, like the Care Act, and the Care Act guidance is, you read it and you think, wow, that's amazing, that's really good, life's going to be good. But actually the reality is that I think that the organisation I now work for did a survey of local authorities, and about 75% of them admitted that they weren't going to be able to comply with their statutory duties in delivering social care because of the lack of money. The system, even though there are fairly strong laws, including the Equality Act and the Human Rights Act, the system is the recording stopped?
No.
Sorry. The system is broken, and so we have to fight a lot to get what our basic needs are.
It does seem that way with most equality laws or disability-oriented legislation. It's very good on paper, but the implementation of it is woeful. And I think that might be where burning issues or campaigning are adequate funding and proper implementation of rights we already own in law. It's been a brilliant experience, Joanna. I'm really happy to be able to do that. And I just would like to end on a question, a wide question, and you can focus on any aspect you like. What does the future hold for disabled people?
I think there's going to be a lot of struggles. I think that one of the positive things about social media is that it's connected a lot of us in ways that we haven't been able to connect in the past. And so that sort of Twitter, disabled people's community, and I know there's quite a few Facebook groups too, that they can mobilize and get things done, get campaigns known about really quickly. There's a lot more battles that need to be won, really. And it's, as we were just saying, it's not just about getting legislation, although that's half of it. The more important half, in a way, is implementation of the legislation, and that's where advice services and lawyers who understand and want to work in disability rights are going to be so important in the future. I hope that's not too depressing.
It's realistic. I like realistic.
Yeah.
Showing some problems. And I think it's useful to have it explain that laws on paper don't always result in better treatment or greater equality of disabled people, and that we need to focus on the proper implementation of them, and to make sure social care and other aspects of disability life are adequately funded in a time where there have been so many cuts and negative narrative around disabled people, and the reality of Brexit being it's even more difficult to get good PAs now than it ever was before. Even though it was difficult back then as well. Thank you, Joanna. It's been a fantastic, insightful conversation with you. I'm really pleased we got you on.
Thank you for inviting me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.